Hello. Hi. Good evening, everyone. Hope you guys are doing well. So thank you so much for joining in today. So let us wait for couple of minutes for other participants to join as well. So before we begin, right, I would like to know how many people here are quite new and attending it for the first time. So it would actually help me to kind of drive this webinar accordingly, right? So maybe you can just probably type in the chat box, so I would know that a lot of people are at a beginner stage and all of that, so I could start with laying down the right foundations for you to understand. Okay, so we have Bob. Hi, Bob. Okay, so you're here for the first time. Okay. Prakash is also the first time. Okay, great, guys. Amazing. So, any more guys who are here for the first time? Okay, cool. And also, I would like to also understand. Okay, thanks. So I see there are a lot of people who are attending today for the first time, right? And also, I would like to also know if you guys are already aware about the blockchain technology and you have quite basics about it, or you're completely new. So you could also probably type that, or if you're already in the blockchain space, right? You could just probably raise your hand or unmute yourself. So I would like to know a bit experience about you and what are your expectations from this webinar. Okay, so we have Atul who is already aware. We have David who is aware. Okay, Kedar. Okay, Bob. Okay, great. Ganesh. Okay, great. So which means that people who are here like quite aware, and most of them are still new. So I'm going to start basics, right? Okay, great. And so, okay, guys, let us begin the webinar. So we're going to have a quite interesting webinar today. So I'm going to discuss more about blockchain success stories and a lot of few case studies which we have implemented, and what are the outcomes of such case studies, and what are the right ways to probably implement blockchain within your enterprise, right? So this is going to be a quite a high level webinar, right? And so I'm going to take some breaks in between to address your doubts and queries. And also, you could just raise your hand if you have any other doubts and queries, and also you can chat in the chat box. So we have our team: Nishad, Sanket, Shehaz, Madhuri, who is going to answer your doubts and questions if you have any. Right? Okay, guys. Good evening and good morning to everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I hope you all are doing well. So, quick introduction about myself. So, I'm Prashant. I'm co-founder of Snapper Future Tech. So, Snapper is essentially one of the leading enterprise blockchain companies. Prior being into blockchain, I was into AI from since 2012, and then in 2015, I moved into blockchain. And one of the reasons why I actually moved into blockchain is that is because of the fact that I think right now, like how internet has actually made trust information open source, I believe blockchain is also making trust open source. And by trust, I mean that the blockchain is purely a technology of trust, which is purely driven by data infrastructure and verification of data at multiple levels all across the network. In different use cases. Hence, I believe blockchain is the answer to a lot of current security issues, essentially, and also uh, data issues which we are facing. So a quick agenda about today, right? So I'm going to cover quickly what is blockchain at a very high level, potential of blockchain, some blockchain concepts, and some use cases as well, right? So this is a quick profile about Snapper Future Tech. So Snapper has been one of the leading enterprise blockchain companies. We have been in space for about 4 years, having worked with Fortune companies to startup to a lot of different governments all across the India. We were, in fact, one of the first few companies in India to do a blockchain-based land records in 2017. The use case was also published in Harvard Business Review and several Ivy League publications. And also, we have been awarded as one of the most promising blockchain startups in India since 2015. And our works has also been covered in top global media, right? And Snapper, so we at Snapper, when we started our journey, we always believed that for any technology to move forward, education plays a very important role. And when we started Snapper, right, one of the key objectives and the difficulties which we're facing was to build our own talent pool, and because it's been always difficult to find right skill sets, because blockchain being one of the most complex technologies. Hence we actually created our own training process for our own organization. And then as we move forward, we realized that actually making it available for the community would actually help us in creating a massive blockchain community. And for any technology to move forward, like internet, education also plays a very important role. So we started IBI with a whole vision of developing India as a global blockchain talent hub. And we work across sectors, right from working professionals to students and the corporates. And one of the most amazing part about IBI is that all our faculties and our instructors are all our developers essentially, which means they are full-time practitioners with Snapper Future Tech. Hence, because of their wonderful, amazing passion and their zeal for reach the community, we actually started IBI. And also we do several other initiatives along with IBI, which is Snapperverse. This is essentially like a Bloomberg for blockchain and crypto world. Snapperverse is currently one of the leading blockchain and crypto media platforms in India. We are serving over 150,000 users from all around the world, and we are still growing. So if you want to know or keep updated about what's happening around the enterprise blockchain space, crypto space, Snapperverse could be one-stop platform for all of that. And this is our solutions and our experience which we have worked across. And I'm going to discuss some of the success stories from supply chain, e-governance, which is land records, and also which is around healthcare, drug traceability. So, right, great guys. So let me bring back to why there has been a need for a blockchain revolution, right? So essentially, our whole revolution around technological, it all began with industrial revolution in late 1700s. It was the first time with the invention of steam engine, trade, commerce, and industrialization essentially started to take place. And it was the first time in the history, right, where people actually started to use a lot of processes, standardization to actually make available goods and services for masses. As we move forward from Industry 1.0 to Industry 3.0, which is more around, involved around more automation and, more involving machineries. But these machineries are not at all smart, because of the fact that Industry 3.0 started in 1970s essentially, which was way before the advent of the internet. And in today's era, which is essentially uses Industry 4.0, which is essentially a combination of all these technologies like AI, blockchain, cloud, big data, and IoT. And one of the biggest challenges in this Industry 4.0 era is all around data. So as I begin my presentation, and I fundamentally believe that, if data is the new oil, then privacy is the biggest climate change. So by that, what I try to say is that everything around data, and data has become such critical to power this entire Industry 4.0, that we are currently working with multiple stakeholders, multiple participants, multiple business processes, and all these are so complex, right? Every transaction or every business in today's world, though we have a lot of ERP systems, though we have a lot of complex and very robust technologies in place, we actually still essentially work in silos. Meaning organizations A, ERP is not connected with organizations B, and that's not connected with the regulators, and so on and so forth, right? And with the business transactions and business networks being so complex, what is the key issue which, actually prevents it from happening? And the answer to all that is trust. Trust in around trust around how, if I allow my other participant or my competitor to actually access my data, or if I allow my supplier to access my data, what if he uses the data for something and tries to do some manipulation? What if he uses the data without my authorization? What if if he gets hacked, I also gets hacked. So how would I, prevent it? Because a lot of times we have seen, right, all across the internet, and primarily a lot of ransomware attacks have started to become more and more common. Hackers are able to get backdoor access and all of that, right? And this advent of wonderful technology, blockchain, it all started with Bitcoins. Hence, blockchain as a concept which has been there was, in a lot of different research papers, like cryptography could be found in a lot of research papers, like distributed computing and all of that. And one enormous guy with the name of Satoshi Nakamoto actually invented Bitcoin. And that was for the first time in history of mankind where I would say probably money was made open source. And all this was possible with this wonderful technology called blockchain. So blockchain to me is essentially a technology of trust, which is purely based upon data computing, where we use data all across a network to verify the transaction autonomously without any intervention of some third parties. So by third parties, I mean that we don't rely upon institutions like Google, Facebook, or banks perhaps to actually verify a transaction or transactions related to money. We would purely rely on the data which is originated all across the network, different sources, to verify the transactions. And this is purely done in a secured, encrypted environment using hashing, encryption, and also in a structured database, which is, as the terminology suggests, which is blockchain. So every block of data is actually interconnected to each other in a chain format. And hence, if anybody wants to modify any particular data across any of the blocks, they would actually need to verify the entire, they have to modify the entire chain, which means that when the transaction has entered into the system, it is no longer processed by one centralized party. That transaction, which is actually, pushed to the system, is actually validated by all the participants across a network. So this means that in the network, there is a participation for everyone all across the ecosystem. And every single point of time, whenever a transaction has happened, that particular data is verified, that is encrypted, and also it has access control. Meaning only the person who is originator of the data have to essentially modify itself with its login ID, password, which we call public key and private key in terms of blockchain, have to verify himself or verify his or her identity that the person is the original owner of the data. And with blockchain, essentially, we are moving towards internet of value. So by essentially this, what I mean is that, right, if you look at current structure of internet, which is web 2.0, we use internet primarily for sharing purposes, streaming purposes, and all of that. But in this current internet, users actually essentially don't own the data. The data is actually owned, controlled, and managed by some third parties. For example, today, if you use any Facebook applications or Facebook ecosystem, the data is owned by Instagram or owned by Facebook or owned by WhatsApp. The control over the data is no longer essentially with the users. If you use your banking application, the entire data is actually controlled by centralized parties like banks. If you're using Google, the entire data is controlled by the Google. But with blockchain, every individual user will be the owner of a data, and this data could be exchanged or transferred from one person or all across the ecosystem in the form of value. Hence, we call blockchain as the internet of value, because it is purely based upon data infrastructure where every individual is in control of the data, and individual will determine who would actually control and own the data. And a lot of security issues and security frauds would actually be solved with this, right? And entire system, or we will move towards an economy which is more like a peer-to-peer economy, which is more like a decentralized economy, right? And that is why for a lot of people, essentially blockchain, right? If you go and Google, like the founder of internet itself, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, has quoted himself that the blockchain revolution could be as big as internet or probably biggest. Bill Gates has appreciated Bitcoin, saying Bitcoin is technological to the force. Similarly, all companies all around the world have started to adopt blockchain across different processes, and which is we are going to discuss that today, and what kind of problem that would essentially solve it, right? So, what is a type of typical business problem with blockchain addresses, or perhaps the data problem, right? So there are three biggest problems as we move ahead. So one problem is the integrity of the value chain. So think of this businesses as a very massive network where participant A is working, B, C, D is working with lawyers, is working with the regulators, is working with all the suppliers, shipping companies, banks, and also a lot of internal departments and processes. And the key challenge is that all these departments and processes are actually working in silos. And even if they share any kind of an information, we have to actually go with an assumption that the information provided is actually true. But we see a lot of frauds happen with this, more centralization structure of this data, right? So, if say, for example, some frauds like insurance frauds, some recent frauds in India, the issuance of fake letter of credit frauds, right, where Nirav Modi fraud, which is a popular one. So, similarly, the biggest problem is the integrity of the value chain. And the other problem is that the fragmented and slow business processes. Since all these participants and the entire business network or our entire internet economy, I would say, since it's working in silos, right, and every single time there has to be a manual intervention to verify every single transaction. Hence, this is quite a slow and a fragmented process. And the biggest problem is the data integrity, right? So whatever data is shared is whether true or false. So what if I say you that with blockchain, you would be able to verify every single transactions without actually sharing the confidentiality of it? What if you could determine the original source of the data? What if you decide with whom, how this data has to be used? And what if we say that this entire transactions or entire thing could be automated to an extent using smart contracts where we don't need to rely on lawyers, banks to actually, verify the transactions or verify our contracts? So this is the kind of potential I'm talking about. And as we move forward, I'm going to discuss quite a few of the success stories and the use cases where blockchain has been implemented and what we have been doing so far in this space. So this brings me that why blockchain is important to the enterprises. Just to summarize it again, right? So essentially, it would facilitate the optimization process all across the organizational boundaries. It would provide greater visibility and transparency of the transactions, and all the friction related to data redundancies and all of that would be reduced because every participant is actually sharing the same book of records, which is essentially the universal book of truth. And hence, blockchain is essentially based on these six basic concepts. One is the business network. Hence, every organization or even internet itself is a massive business network where you have users, where you have service providers, where you have platform operators, and so on and so forth, right? And also you have participants in a network. So we all come together to create a network. Participants are part of a network, and essentially we also use contracts, right, to do the transactions and to verify at different points in different points of time. And these assets essentially all across the internet is our data. So, and every single time whenever we do or browse internet, we generate data, and that data is nothing but transactions and a ledger. So essentially also blockchain is a combination of all these things, and it is automating the entire process by having a rules and the governance, right? So you put in or you feed in the system the rules and the governance on how this entire business network should operate. Like for an example, if I have to move money from A to B, you could set up or use smart contracts. So smart contracts are a set of contracts which is a self-executable contracts, right? And that would execute automatically based on the parameters of the contract, and if any of those parameters triggers by tracking all the assets, or essentially by tracking all the data or all the transactions. And all these transactions are actually kept in a single book of records, which we call it a ledger, so which serves as a single source of truth. So in any use case, as we move further, I'm going to talk about how all the participants are actually coming together and forming a backbone to support all the transactions for all the parties, and what are the kind of value created through this is actually tremendous and massive. Hence, I feel that blockchain is actually forming a backbone for all other technologies like AI, IoT, cloud, and big data, right? So essentially, imagine that, in a scenario where a multiple cloud computing and operable. For example, whatever data I have on AWS or Microsoft Azure, I cannot move my data seamlessly, even at the cloud level, right? So what stops them? It's not just the internet problem that stops. It's the various data complexities which actually prevents it from happening. Hence, using blockchain, we are actually creating a data infrastructure on the top of that existing architecture and the infrastructure to actually facilitate the social trust, or to facilitate trust from one participant to any other participants. Purely relying ourselves on the computer codes, on the consensus, the rules and the regulations, using smart contracts and data, essentially. Right. So, any doubts so far on the introduction of blockchain and what is blockchain? Okay.
There's nothing on the chat, Prashant. You can proceed, Aaron.
Okay, great. So now moving towards the blockchain potential, right? So essentially, as per World Economic Forum, Gartner, and several other sources, right, over 10% of the global GDP will be stored in blockchain, and lot of assets, which so we are talking about trillions and trillions dollars of worth of assets being actually stored on the blockchain. And the business value added by the blockchain is going to exceed by over $176 billion, and by 2030 it could be $3.1 trillion. So Gartner has published a very wonderful paid research report from which we have taken this data, essentially. And they actually describe the entire cycle around the blockchain and the adoption, and they also essentially compare it with all the other technologies. And this is the massive blockchain ecosystem currently. So right from all the big banks to big cloud providers such as big banks like JP Morgan, ICICI, Goldman, Barclays, stock exchanges, Nasdaq, and a lot of other several platforms have already started to use blockchain. And a lot of development agencies like United Global level, like the World Bank, IMF, World Economic Forum, all of that has also adopted blockchains. There are a lot of top academia and industry bodies, like top Ivy League institutions, is actually providing blockchain related education. There are a lot of governments all around the world is involved, and as we speak, the space is actually getting bigger and bigger. And there is a lot of other service providers, right from Tata Consulting Services to Accenture, IBM, and even Snapper is also one of the top partners or the players at a global level in this ecosystem. So this is actually taken from one of the reports from IDC. Right. And now moving towards blockchain success stories, right? So currently, blockchain is actually being implemented all across. So in banking for KYC and identity management, one of the key challenges in identity is that wherever for example, today you use your identity at one of the banks or on one of the platforms on the internet, what is the guarantee that whatever identity you have used is not being used, without your authorization, or is not being used fraudulently? To the surprise, right? And I'm sure a lot of you must be aware that on the dark market, all these identities are actually traded like anything. On the dark web, actually the fake passports and a lot of identities of the people, including their login ID and the passwords for a lot of different websites and the platforms are being traded, right? So all these issues could actually be solved with blockchain. Like for example, today if I verify my identity, right, I would just generate a hash of my verification, and that same hash could be shared with a lot of other participants to verify my identity again and again over a period of time, which means that I'm able to verify myself without actually sharing my data and purely using data computing. So in banking and insurance, it will play a massive role, right from your identity management to your contracts, to your issuance of insurance policies, trade finance, syndicated loans, and mortgages, right? So what if you be able to process the mortgages in real time? Like for example, you would on a blockchain, you'd be just able to verify that you are the original owner of the property, and based on the entire trail at what price your properties and everything would be purchased, we could have a computer algorithm to determine what is the current market value, and all your loans would be issued like instantly without having actually going through several other middlemen, right? So similarly in financials, right, you could have for equity security, blockchain could also enable real-time settlement of your securities, right? So the need for having all the front offices, back offices, middle offices in a complex capital market scenario would be reduced to a lot of extent. Also in the manufacturing and the supply chain processes to track the provenance, integrity of the supply chain, whether what are the products you're consuming is original or not. whether whatever the ingredient to verify the ingredients mentioned in the products are true or false, right? So every point of time, what if this all these manufacturing and all these complex supply chains start together, forming a one ecosystem of data where everything is actually verified, by having all the best practices in place, and that would be purely determined by the computer codes in a very secure environment, and the conclusions would be arrived. So for government, it would play a massive role, right from issuing digital identities to several certificates, also enabling digital voting. And after with COVID, I think blockchain is essentially the need of the hour, because people would want to reduce more and more physical interactions. A lot of things they would just want to automate. RPA will kick in, security, and with Zoom recently, Zoom was hacked and all of that. So all of these things of more one entity controlling so many things, or perhaps centralization, would actually get reduced to a lot of extent, and eventually we'll move to an environment on the where all the participants are coming together to form a business network, or to form an ecosystem where everything is everything is able to verify in an automated environment, purely based on data computing, which will have the highest level of trust, highest level of integrity, and most importantly, it will be at the highest level of its smartness, because everything will be automated. So essentially, what does it tells us that we could think of using blockchain wherever there is multiple stakeholders in an ecosystem, where the data is essentially or critically more important, where we need to have more smart process, or the decisions has to be taken more smartly, in a scenario where this data has to be also shared with multiple third parties, and where also security is one of the key issues, right? Since blockchain is based on peer-to-peer distributed computing, it would also have zero downtime. Like for example, even today, cloud technology or the cloud computing has only 99.99% uptime guarantee. A lot of time we found that even big cloud service providers are also down, right? AWS was hacked, Facebook was also hacked, and we have seen some Cambridge Analytica scams and all of that. So in this scenario, what if I say you that having blockchain, since a peer-to-peer network, if even one participant in an ecosystem is down, essentially the network and the data would be able to operate, because the other peer is actually sharing the same copy of a data and the same copy of a truth. So which means essentially, with more participants coming onto the system and creating a bigger blockchain network, the network will be more scalable, and the network will be more secured. And also there'll be higher scalability. Will be able to essentially process more and more transactions, because of a fact that we have more computational power at disposal. So similarly, all the big companies, right from Walmart to Foxconn, which actually manufactures for Apple, AVG, Rolls Royce, Airbus, all of these have actually started to use blockchain to track a lot of their parts, which is actually coming right from their suppliers. So they would have a real time access where their components are, when it was purchased, what its warranty status is like, which it could be used to an extent to track safely in a privacy controlled environment, to know which customer in which car is actually using this particular part. And it would make a lot of processes like calling of the vehicles, and also tracking of different processes across the supply chain, and to judge what's happening across the supply chain and all of that. So I'm going to talk about one of the success stories from Walmart, how it started to use blockchain to provide transparency across the food supply chain. Right, essentially we consume a lot of different types of food products, agricultural product. We consume very expensive high-end products, coffee. So how do we know whether this process or this product was actually originated from that source or not? And what if using blockchain we know, and we could verify when it was actually harvested by the farmer, and when it was moved by the logistics player, when it was actually processed and all of that. And during this entire process, essentially, right, if any of the data point doesn't match, which means that there is some or the other frauds which is actually happening. And the most important thing, that the flow of data is actually automated. Like for example, whatever production data is actually entered by the processor or the manufacturer, the same data has also to be entered, or the record has to be kept by a logistics provider, which means the logistics provider is again doing the more process, and in fact it is doing more complicated process because it has to put in more of the clearances, documents, and all of that. But what if using a blockchain, all this data is shared with all the participants in real time in a secured environment, serving as a single source of truth. And if any one participant try to modify the data, it would actually essentially have to go to all the different participants and at the same time have to actually modify the data, which is practically impossible. And if there is any mismatch across the data, right, the red flag will be triggered. So it would create a higher level of trust. And the most important thing was that the time to trace the provenance of the mangoes. So Walmart actually started to use it for tracking of the different products, which has a lot of complex supply chain processes, right? So this project was actually essentially started in 2016, and it moved into pilots and then alpha and then beta stage till 2018 January. And in 2018 September, Walmart started to mandate all its suppliers to get onboarded on its own blockchain platform, and provide the data of everything what's happening. And because of this, the entire time to track any particular product or to have a status report or to check if there would be any delays or anything, it actually reduced to almost real time. So this actually has a very huge impact in terms of business terms. And another success story is a TradeLens. So TradeLens is a global shipping solution. So this project was actually started by Maersk and IBM to make the global supply chain, to actually enable global shipping processes much more simpler. So if you see, right, every goods or every international transactions, or any moving from US to India, or India to US, so on and so forth, goes through over 24 complex processes and several hundreds of pages of complex documentation. And one of the key challenges is that whatever the copy of a document a one party has, or let's say a shipping registry has, or the port might not have the same copy of the data. And every single time a person or a company or an entity has to go to these different participants, provide the same copy of a data again and again, and all of that. So what if using a blockchain, if all of them is actually onboarded onto a single platform, and whatever data or whatever status update is updated or by any one participant is actually reflected to every participant across an ecosystem. This way, using purely, we are able to generate or determine the data at source. We are able to track who is the original owner of the data, and most importantly, we are also making the entire network smart by using smart contracts. Which means that if a good has reached to port a 10% of the payment has to be released from escrow, something like that. Traditionally, we used to rely on escrow agents. We used to rely on banks, and also we used to rely on documents which is generated by the shipping companies. And we have seen a lot of frauds which has happened as a matter of fact, where people try to do fraudulent transaction duping insurance companies. Even today, hundreds of billions of dollars is actually is lost during this entire process, and the banks and the insurance companies are actually cheated. So with all these processes, since if any fraud happens or anything happens, even a verification of every single transaction would be much easier, because they would be able to verify the transactions purely using the data at the source itself, and since the data is rendered by the participants. So currently, over 94 of the top organizations all across the globe have started to use TradeLens. Over 20 port and terminal operators have started to use TradeLens. Over 154 million transactions is captured, and over with that is which is increasing, and also which is increasing exponentially week after week. And 80% improvement in communication and efficiency, and on drastic reduction in delays due to document errors, and all of that. So we are essentially, with blockchain at a very high level, we are creating a single source of data or a single source of truth, which could be accessed by all the participants across an ecosystem. So these are some more few use cases, which is quite exciting in the manufacturing space, which is already happening. So one is essentially the contract management, right? So think of a use case of essentially shipping, where you have to deal with multiple contracts with multiple parties. and using the smart contracts and mapping it with the different data levels, this could be entirely automated, using by creating more efficiency and trust. Supply chain management, where you'll be able to track all the parts, all your suppliers, and have a record of all these used parts, right? So this means that if a company has to probably buy any kind of a vehicle or buy any kind of a part, it would actually know the provenance, how old is that part, when was the car was actually purchased, and whether the part is in good condition or not. So nobody would be able to actually fake any of those information. Even for customers, whenever you go out and think of buying any pre-owned cars, pre-owned watches, or any of those pre-owned products, mobile phones, and all of that, you would be able to know or track its entire history of that product from all the participants in a network, rather than relying on just one particular party, right? Warranty management, and they are also specifically in the automobile space, electronic space, right? Managing the warranty is one of the key issues, and this would also help in tracking of warranties, asset tracking promises, specifically in the diamond space, tracking of golds, silver, precious jewelries, and watches, right? So these are the industries which is actually most affected, and luxury products, which is actually affected by the highest amount of counterfeiting. Imagine before you buying a Louis Vuitton bag, you would just know whether who was the previous owner of this bag, and when was this bag produced, and at what price it was even purchased. So whenever you're buying it again, or even you're buying a pre-owned product, you will know that you're actually buying from the rightful owner, and you're not buying any product which is actually stolen, and things like that. So hence blockchain is actually creating tremendous value, and the contractual management, the use cases is has an amazing value, right? And this is just a quick example which I have discussed, and these are the few benefits, right? So one don't need to actually do the same order printing or a process again and again. We are bringing in more RPAs and more automation into place. Every time the sales order and all of that will be created, and they will be auto generated on shipping notices, generation of invoices, and all of that will be entirely automated. And now coming to one of the use cases which we have actually performed in India, by in the educational space, where we have created a platform called SnapCert to kind of issue any kind of certificate and to verify it real time. So this is the problem statement which we are actually addressing, and in next couple of years we are looking forward to onboard over 100 million records on the blockchain using a SnapCert platform. So SnapCert platform is essentially like it serves as a trust protocol for certificates. So you could think of issuing any kind of certificates, your birth certificates, death certificates, educational certificates, your essentially technical certificates, right? And like several other, like your a letter of credit. So anything which is actually required to have any kind of value or a credit, you could issue this certificate. And on a SnapCert, you could also map it with a smart contract to further automate the entire process. So it's a very robust platform. And if any of you guys are in the enterprise space and looking forward for such kind of a solution, you could always reach out to us. So this was a problem statement which we actually started to cater. So we started to cater and primarily look at more at an educational kind of a certificate, right? Because most of the resumes contain false and misleading information, and because of which corporates or in enterprises, employers are actually forced to employ some third party background verification company to verify a person's credentials record. And in that entire process, right, we trust on some background third party companies which would actually go to the universities or which would actually go to our past employer to verify whether we have performed or not. And this entire process, right, there's a lot of time, energy, and also money which is actually getting involved. And with using blockchain and SnapCert, we are actually enabling the primary source verification, right? And it costs an employer also a significant amount of money because of one's bad hire. So these are the few quick stats as you could see in the slide. And here we created a SnapCert, which is like a trust protocol for certificates. So every single time whenever a certificate is generated, it's encrypted using hashing, and all the certificates and the records are the tamper-proof, meaning without the authorization and the approval of the institutions, the original owners, no person would be able to modify or that data. So you could think of this like an identity for all your certificates, where every individual is having an identity in all his certificates, whatever person is generated, a kind of a digital locker is created, a secure digital locker, where the entire verification could be done in real time. and you don't have to also share your original data. So this way, we are actually creating a more scenario where certification for a lot of government agencies, for all your visas, for all your passports, and for all your subsidies, which actually flows in the traditional scenario, right, would be automated, would be more transparent, and that would be purely without any intervention of third parties. So this is a quick architecture of how this would operate, right? So essentially, you could see Snapshot is forming more like a backbone for all kinds of certificates. So if any corporate is requesting for verification of any data, that would send to this blockchain network, and that would be samely also be checked in real time with the databases of the background verification agencies, with the colleges, universities, and all of that. So this way, the entire process flow. So you could see this is just one simple example of academic certificate, that to issuance and verification. But as we move towards more complex scenarios where your visa has to be issued or your passport has to be generated and so on, and where the same data has to be shared again and again, multiple times, and there are chances of issuance of all these fake documents, process of fake subsidies, and so on and so forth. Right? You could think of using a snapshot in all these scenarios. Other processes and other tremendous successful use case which we have been working successfully is around tracking of counterfeit medicines. So that is very surprising to know for us that over around 1% of 30% drugs are actually some expensive drugs such as your cancer drugs, penicillin circulation are fake. And a lot of times these scheduled drugs are also used for a lot of illegal purposes, right? People produce fake prescriptions, and or even that would actually cost not only businesses, right, but also governments a lot of amount of money. Even insurance companies suffer because a lot of patients die annually, and there is currently no way of actually verifying whether the medicines consumed are fake or not, apart from the trust relied on the right or authorized retailers. And because of which, insurance company also won't process your insurance, and a lot of patients actually die. So the problem statement which we are in today's scenario is actually quite huge. And what if I say you that the entire process of this would be automated? So similarly, here again, the blockchain would form a complete backbone, right from the manufacturer to the end consumer. Everything would be tracked. So every single box of drug would have a QR code with its hash ID. So this hash ID would contain all the information, right from its ingredients, its manufacturing date, its expiry date, and all the other information on the QR code. And every single time whenever a medicine is produced, a distributor has to scan the QR code, and that thing is get updated on the blockchain network. So in this way, a manufacturer would essentially know at what single point of time where these drugs are. So say, let's say, for example, if a drug with serial number X has to be sold in New York at a pharmacy Y, and the same drug with a serial number X, some people who are actually, or the wholesaler is trying to do some fraud and sends that drug to, let's say, California. And just by scanning a QR code and geolocation and other technologies, one would be able to verify, and immediately that flag would be triggered to to a manufacturer or to any of the authorized party or a regulator that these drugs are being actually smuggled somewhere. Similarly, if someone tries to produce the drug with the same serial number, which essentially happens in current scenario, because right now there is not such serialization procedure yet in the manufacturing of medicines yet. So they would track by the batch numbers essentially, right? So we could essentially serialize, or we could essentially create an asset of every single drugs on the network. So which means the regulator would always know at certain point of time that almost 100,000, for example, penicillin medicines was produced by the Pfizer, and out of which 10,000 is in this location, and this is the consumer, this is the doctor, or this is the people, or some end party have actually tried to consume it. And at a manufacturer level, we are actually making drug identification, visibility, traceability, and also the authenticity, that whether this is the right user or the right audience to actually consume that medicine or not. At a distributor and a wholesaler, right, we are providing the verification. We are making sure that whether this medicine is original or not without any fears, right? and also providing more data visibility, and also to insurance companies, they could actually map insurance policies based on the medicines pattern of the end consumer, right? This way the premium would also also wouldn't suffer a significant amount of impact. And a lot of people who actually try to fake their health conditions just to get an insurance policies could also be prevented, because depending on the type of medicine a person is consuming, I could determine, insurance company would be able to determine what kind of a problem a person has. And also from regulatory perspective, regulator would know, which person at which location is trying to consume, because traditionally, currently, all these records are maintained in a trail of papers, which is quite difficult to actually manage it. And the other context in India where also we have used blockchain. So this was one of the very few first use cases. In fact, we started to actually implement in 2016, 2017 with government of Andhra Pradesh. So it is very sad to know that currently a lot of transactions in India actually happen at a gunpoint. And in property transaction, it's such complex that you have different departments, like from land department, revenue department. You have 100 different types of taxes, municipal authority, legal bodies, banks, utility companies like your gas, your electricity, and all of that. And then you have so many middlemen like agents, brokers, buyers, sellers, lawyers, and all of that. And the key challenge is that all the data, all the records are actually not essentially sync with all the parties in real time, right? So the data in the land record department would be different from the from the revenue department or the municipal authority, because once to do a particular transaction traditionally in India, and I assume this is the same problem all around the world, the same copy of a document has to be submitted again and again. So which means that a person could essentially produce a fake sale deed, because even sale deed in India is essentially considered as a ownership, as a title to an ownership, right? A person is entitled to an ownership. So a lot of transactions happen at a gunpoint. People are able to produce a lot of fake sales deeds and claim, and even bank also suffers while financing a property. And even if a bank has to kind of issue or generate loans specifically in land, I'm talking about, not apartments and all of that, they would actually hire some third party company to verify the entire trail of record, and that third party verifier has to go through all these different bodies, get that kind of data, compile it. Hence it's a very tedious process. So what's if on a using blockchain, right, we could actually automate and simplify the process. So as soon as a sales deed is registered to the buyer and the seller, the price at what it is entered could be determined, and that same data could be shared with the banks in real time. So the banks would know that this transaction is happening at this X particular value. Hence, this is the amount of loan which has to be processed. They could also have access to all the records, which is actually a verified record directly coming into the primary source from land departments and all the government departments essentially, and the entire loan would be processed for the utilities. And once the ownership is actually transferred, all the data records in the land department, municipal authorities, legal bodies, and utility companies, all the records would be get updated in real time, which means a citizen need not go to both these departments individually and separately to essentially update all the trails in all the records, right? And also, it could prevent, or it would also help government in generating a lot of tax revenue and identify the leakages in the system essentially. So these are the few use cases and the success stories where blockchain could be implemented, and they are actually much more success stories. So using, as I told you earlier, that you could actually think of essentially implementing blockchain anywhere where there is multiple stakeholders and trust is the biggest issue. You could think of implementing blockchain. And there's another new amazing, one of the biggest blockchain events happening from 25th May to 31st May, where there is over 5,000 participants, and even I'm also speaking essentially on the blockchain. So you could also probably sign up for this. This is one of the free sources for having amazing knowledge, interacting with one of the top speakers all around the world. So you could also sign up for that. So any questions so far?
Prashant, there's a question from Vineet.
Okay.
He's like, nowadays there's a lot of traction in decentralized finance. So can you just elaborate on that part?
Okay, so essentially, so for DeFi, we will be doing a separate session, but DeFi is more, as I told you, is one of the use cases in the fintech space, is decentralized finance. So essentially, Bitcoin is one of able to move money without any banks. Also, it is moving towards a level where we are actually thinking of an entire world where we don't need a bank. It's purely a model where there is a peer-to-peer finances. Like, for example, being an individual, right? I want to actually give a loan to a person in India. So essentially, in India, the interest rate is quite high, and due to complex structures, right? Actually, regulators and the government actually prevents me from taking a loan from the person in the United States. With Bitcoin, just that's very a simple use case. But with Bitcoin, essentially now the money has become more global. I could just move money without any borders. I could swap money in any fiat currency all around the world. So similarly, in DeFi or decentralized finance, we can think of a use case where a person sitting in India would be able to borrow money from the people in Japan, or for the person in Japan at the lowest rate of interest. So similarly, a person keeping their money in Japan is actually getting almost negative interest rate, or a person is losing money. That could lend it out to a person in India and could get a more competitive rate. So this way, we are actually creating a more self-governed financing model, which is powered by a peer-to-peer, and all the contracts would be in a way where which would be mutually agreed by both the parties. So party A who is actually lending the money to a party B could put that these are the terms of contracts and these are my collaterals. So we will be a person. So person would be having a one digital identity where his entire assets would be mapped, and the person would be able to do collateral. So imagine you owning a property in Dubai and you could put it as a collateral security in Japan and all of that. So DeFi is more of a self-governed peer-to-peer finance model where we rely on the primary source data and elimination of all these middlemen, which is actually quite expensive and restricting people to move towards an open economy. Okay, and any other questions so far?
Yeah, can blockchain help improve fintech sector?
Of course. So fintech is one of the first sectors to actually get affected by blockchain, and already we have seen with Bitcoin, significantly now Bitcoin has become more and more global money. In fact, the transaction volume which is happening all around cryptocurrency market today is over $150 billion on a daily basis. That is exponentially higher the entire trading volume of India and the Hong Kong and the Japanese stock markets combined. And the entire money which is moved around, I'm just talking about the payment space, in the crypto space today exceeds over $8 to $10 billion. Visa moves or Visa actually processes around $52 billion of transaction, which means in just 10 years, we are able to get 20% of the entire global payments market. And that is just the beginning. And with DeFi, as I told you, coming in, the finance and entire structure will become more and more bigger. And we could imagine a world where we would be able to trade without any, we could be able to imagine a world without any banks. We could be able to imagine a world which is without any stock markets, where everything or every stock is purchased at a more at a peer-to-peer level without having any centralized stock exchanges and clearance houses. So there will be a drastic shift in the business model altogether. Okay, sure. So also, we conclude this webinar, right? I would like to understand if any of you are essentially, looking for building their career in the blockchain space, right? Because at part of IBI, we tend to offer a lot of courses which is more around aspirations based, right? So based on our experience, more on the courses which will actually help you to pursue your career, and a lot of might think that whether blockchain is the right career to pursue or not. So from that perspective, also I would like to just talk a bit about on that, as well before we essentially conclude the webinar, right? So with IBI, the whole objective of IBI has been actually to create a community of skilled working professionals and talent pool of that, and we offer courses which are purely helping you to become the right career path. Like for example, a blockchain administrator. So a blockchain administrator is essentially for those people who are looking or who are more involved at an infrastructure level and want to get more deep dive into that. So we offer programs around Ethereum and the Hyperledger, and all our courses curriculum is as per the global standards of Hyperledger. And also we have an architect program where you could essentially look forward to build your career in an enterprise architecture based space, because architecture plays a very important role in solution designing. So this is for a working professional who has some quite a bit of an experience. And then we have programs for beginners as well, which is who actually want to get into development of smart contracts, create decentralized applications, and defy kind of an apps more scenario. And also we have courses for people who come from a management background and want to pursue their career in the consulting space. So we provide all the courses based on an aspiration. And IBI is one of the only institutes in India which is also a part of Government of India's Skill India initiative, which is actually focused more on creating India as a global blockchain talent pool. And also, if you are an enterprise and if you want to also schedule a free workshop for enterprise, you could just go on our corporate and just fill a quick form, and our team will get in touch with you. So you could always get in touch with us. There is all the contact information which is mentioned there. You could drop us a mail, and also you could just reach out to us. Thank you so much. So if you have any other doubts or any other queries around this, please do let me know, and I'll be happy to chat.
Yeah, hi. I have one note here.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, actually, how can we know means whether the particular sector or the transaction done by using blockchain only? See, for example, as you said the earlier, the pharma sector or the transport sector like that, all are moving into the blockchain, right?
Right.
Yeah. See, for example, if I made any transaction, means how can I know whether the particular transaction is very secure? It's under the blockchain only, like that as a common.
So actually, the thing is that, just to answer your question at a very high level, right? Blockchain is based on a concept, as I told you, encryption, which is a public-private key cryptography. So there are several different kinds of encryption, like you have SHA-256, you have AES, you have 128-bit encryption, you have 256-bit encryption. So every single time, whenever a transaction is generated onto the system or initiated, it's encrypted using hashing. And again, that's a complex process. So how hashing works and all of that is something which is a very in-depth concept, and we cover in our advanced modules. But just to give you an overview, it's a process where, let's say, the original data is one. So I would just encrypt it into some characters as A, B, B, Y, Y, Z, Z, etc., etc. And once the original owner puts his key, which is the original owner, he would be able to verify it. So it's a process of encryption, decryption, essentially encoding and decoding. So every single transaction on a network is actually gone through a process of hashing, and then we have also a structure called Merkle tree, where all the transactions are actually mapped to every single block. So there are a lot of different scenarios and complexities to track a transaction on blockchain and how it works.
No. Actually, the thing is, what I'm asking, please let me elaborate. Actually, if we are using any online transaction, means on simply while making the transaction at the end, it's showing that PCI DASS and HIPAA, like that, the security wise.
Right.
Yeah. For this type of blockchain, how can we know? So yes, this network is under blockchain, so we can able to trust the network like that. That's the question actually.
Okay, so the thing is, right, so there are quite a few ways. So one of the first few ways is that you have something like Block Explorer. So just let me... Similarly, you can have a Block Explorer for a lot of other different things as well. So this is a Bitcoin Block Explorer. So here, just waiting it for it to load, right? So you could actually essentially go to Google and check out the Block Explorer, and you would know how would you know whether the transaction or the network is on the blockchain. But for any system to be on a blockchain, there are few properties which it has to follow. So the properties, as I told you initially, is that it has to be decentralized, meaning there should be more number of participants in a network and more number of nodes. There has to be a consensus. So consensus is a process of actually having a rules and the governance. There should be a smart contracts. And then there should be an access or data which has actually moved, or which is actually have to move all across the network. So these are the few ways to know whether a business or a network is on the blockchain or not. But also to give you a quick glimpse, it would also, so I think is because of Zoom and other things being, the website is quite slow. Anyways, so if you go to a block explorer or a blockchain network, right, you will be able to see the hash of different transactions. Essentially, I'll just see if this comes up.
Shiva?
Yeah, so this would look like this, right? So you have this block height, which is essentially a block number, and then you have this hash. So if I click this hash, I would be able to see the entire transactions on this. So this is more from a Bitcoin, and then you have a miner. So miner are basically the infrastructure provided to this, and this is the Merkle tool. This is the version, and this is the data, the nums, and the transaction value. So how much amount of Bitcoins were actually moved in the network, and from which address to which address, and all of that. So there you can see that if I click this hash or something, there is nobody knows who's the original owner of that, but the entire network knows using the blockchain. So once I do a transaction, I would generate a transaction hash, which I would share it with you. So in this case, this could be the transaction hash. So if I click it, I would know whether the transaction has confirmed or been verified or not, and when it was verified. So we have all the details here. So this is how you would know whether a system is on a blockchain or not, essentially. But there are also other several ways, but that's a very in-depth question, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Shiva, we'll be having a technical session. Basically, we'll be covering blockchain basic concepts this coming Saturday and Sunday. So we'd really like you if you can join there. So we'll be able to answer a lot of technical questions there.
Yeah, sure. If possible, could you please drop me the link so that I can able to?
Yeah, by tomorrow, so you'll be getting the link.
Okay.
You have your email ID, right? So we'll be sending across the link on your email. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Most welcome.
Okay. Any other doubts?
Actually, one more doubt from my end. Sorry for that.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, actually, nowadays most of the blockchains is under the R&D process, right? Most of the companies are trying to introduce their private blockchains and everything, right?
Right.
Yeah. Is there any impact of these COVID-19 on that? Because will the companies are willing to invest?
In fact, actually, the thing is, blockchain and all the other technologies will be more high in demand because companies will move towards more automation in the processes. They will try to bring more and more RPA because of a fact that we see that the demand for all the blockchain developers is on the high rise. And also essentially right now, so we have this entire placement report, which is a very detailed report on how companies are moving towards the blockchain and what kind of job impact it would actually have. So you could go to this and you would identify what kind of opportunities available in which domain, which platforms, which kind of companies, and all of that. So you could go to our platform under success stories, there's a placement report and you will get in complete insights. But if you ask me from my perspective, essentially for these technologies, right, since it's purely a data infrastructure technology and security is also becoming one of the key issues. And because of this COVID, a lot of companies would like to automate their entire processes, bring in more smart contracts. And so definitely blockchain is going to see faster adoption, in fact, expected in terms of technological adoption. Plus, if you are a very good developer, essentially, I mean, the pay is also quite high as blockchain is as one of the highest paid jobs, essentially. So, and so this is actually the report as well, like the LinkedIn job report, right? So in LinkedIn job report 2020, blockchain was the most demanded skill essentially. And since, as I told you, right, it's a very complex technology. A lot of people who just go online and do some course and think they are a blockchain expert or something like that. It does not work this way because we as an enterprise blockchain company has spent over 4 to 5 years and we are still in that a learning curve, in this entire process because the technology is so complex. It's just 11 years old. And in terms of enterprise practice and adoption, it's just like very nascent. It's at a very infant stage. Hence the growth curve and the learning curve is tremendous. And the people who get in early would obviously have an early mover advantage. Similarly, like the internet thing, right? Before internet coming into the picture, who thought that internet would be such a massive, bigger revolution? Similarly, like ERPs and Oracle. When Oracle and SAP was launched, nobody actually thought of doing a course on the Oracle and SAP. But today, at a point, they were one of the most highest paid jobs because ERP was the most hot take technology. In fact, people at some point thought that the ERP would replace the entire operating system as well. So similarly, right, blockchain is also at that stage, where very early stage, where there is a very high demand but lack of talent pool in the space, or implementationers or executioners, I would say, right. Everybody would understand it theoretically, but the question is how many of the people or the experts could actually create and build an app, because it's a very complex process. There is so many things. You have to set up a network. You have to then integrate it with the front back. And there's so many complexities involved around it. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
I think you're good to go. That's it.
Okay, great. So I will conclude the webinar, guys. Thank you so much. So for our more upcoming webinars, you could just subscribe to our mail letters just by putting or providing your mail ID, and then also go to our free webinars and also subscribe there. We also have put up a lot of free content on our YouTube channel around blockchain related technologies. You could also go there and kind of sign up there. So thank you so much, guys, and it was really great to have you here today. Take care and stay safe.
This is being something which is very astonishing to me, that as per several studies and reports, only 5 to 10% of the people are actually employable. By that, what I mean is that only 5 to 10% of the working class or the working people have the right skill set to be employed. And this is one of the major hindrances leading to unemployability. And the only way to overcome is upskill yourself. With rising competition, upskilling has become one of the key priorities. And understanding this fact, IBI has come up with an exclusive program for the students, which we call it Blockchain Plus Internship Program. So this Blockchain Plus Internship Program will help you to learn in depth about blockchain technology, working on several projects, creating decentralized applications, along with an internship in Snapper Future Tech. So in this entire program, you're going to learn the entire product lifecycle development, what goes into enterprise grade applications and solutions and production. And this program is basically for students. This is about 2 to 3 months program, and it is a live instructor-led program. So any person from around the world can participate in this program, can sign up, and will also get an internship appointment letter with Snapper Future Tech. So you're going to work with the industry-leading faculties. You're going to get a lot of mentorship during the program, and also get a lot of hands-on experience to learn about creating your own product. So even if you're looking forward to be an entrepreneur, this is the right program for you, because you know what goes into the product development, what is the thought process, what kind of a business model you should think about, and most importantly, how is the product lifecycle development. You need to always hear your customers out. So this program is exclusively aimed at students, primarily freshers, who are looking forward to land their dream job and build their career in the technology space. So blockchain is one of the most paid skills in demand. It's the number one skill in demand. It's the best time to learn blockchain. And this is only one of a kind industry program which will help you not only learn, but also get internship. So at the end of the program, you're going to be evaluated by your faculties and get an internship letter from Snapper Future Tech, which is one of the leading enterprise blockchain companies. So this program will cover Ethereum, Hyperledger, and also internships. You're going to learn a lot about Ethereum, which is a public blockchain, Solidity, how to create decentralized application, create your own tokens, write your own smart contracts, along with Hyperledger ecosystem and how to create create a network. You are going to learn about Golang, Kubernetes, Dockers, and so on and so forth. So this is really exciting program. This program is exclusively for you. So please sign up, as we have limited seats available for this. Thank you so much and have a good day.